I don't know how much you know about the CAFFE CINO. Briefly, it was the first of the off-Broadway theaters. About 3 years after the CINO opened, there were 600 off-Broadway theaters in New York. It was terribly influential both in subject matter and form and style in all of the playwriting, movies, rock, concerts, so many things that have come since. I'm going to tell you how that all happened. I have to tell you a little bit about me first and how I got there. I'm from Roswell, New Mexico. I was a bookworm. There was no use whatsoever and no respect whatsoever for intelligence or education where I came from. Almost every family photo of me shows me babysitting my sister's children. Some of you gave in of a certain age may remember when there was no use for you in the family because you were not married and did not have children. I grew up to be a Southwest art fairy. There was nowhere for me to go, so I went into the service. I was thrown out because they found a love coin to another airman in my wallet. Although I said, I'll stay. You can tell anybody you want I'm gay. I'll stay. They said they just couldn't. So like so many art fairies, I went into summer stock. But that's only 3 months. On my way back from summer stock in Maine, I stopped off in Manhattan to see a college friend who now lived there. He wasn't home. So I checked my bags with his landlady and asked her where Greenwich Village was, where the artists are. I took a subway train and got out on 14th Street and 7th Avenue. I walked down the street following the Salvation Army band. And at Sheridan Square, I noticed this villagey little side street, just like in the movies. West 4th Street, cut it off. I walked down it, and at the corner of a 1 block long side street, I saw a boy with long hair and jewelry around his neck and thin linen pants, obviously wearing no underwear. I followed him down that 1 block long side street.
Yeah.
His name was Johnny Dodd. I had no way of knowing that he was a stage lighting genius whose work, the influence of whose work can still be seen in every crazily lit rock special on PBS. The place he went into was a funny little storefront with strange signs on it that you had to tilt your head to read. You look backwards. Okay. Sorry, these are the biggest pictures I have. There it is at night. The interior that afternoon was dark and sweet smelling of coffee and Italian drink syrups. The ceilings were hung with little teeny tinsel toys and bells and little tiny Christmas tree lights, what they call ice cream lights. And the people that were there, I didn't know they were rehearsing. I thought they were putting on a show. How did I know people didn't put on shows in the afternoon in New York coffee houses? Were oddly dressed, strangely fresh and frank. I soon met the founder of the CAFFE CINO, for that is what it was, Joe CINO. Joe was from a family in Buffalo. They had no use for art fairies in Buffalo either. So Joe, after childhood and teens, came to New York to be an actor and dancer. He was a houseboy on Fire Island, where they called him Ginger. He was on Fire Island. He acted in a few plays and then danced in some obscure troupes around the country for a while. But he had a terrible weight problem for an dancer. He was very short and had a weight problem. So he sort of retired very sadly at about 30 and opened a coffee house with the idea that just a place where his friends could come, and his life was pretty much over. His lover, Johnny Torrey, was an electrical genius who rigged the wiring of the CINO so that the payphone was free. And he tapped the subway lines for electricity for Johnny Dodd's magnificent lights. Johnny stole the lighting instruments from various dance companies he did lights for. You never saw such lights in such a small place. Joe lived behind the coffee counter where he received his friends. 100 art fairies from all over. Important ones were an actor named Joe Davies, who was sort of a father figure to us and even to Joe. I don't suppose he was really that much older than us. Some of the important art fairies were Johnny Dodd, the light genius, Tommy Garland, who made sandwiches and danced an avant-garde dance a few blocks away at Judson Church, and Kenny Burgess, the dishwasher, who was an artist. And since the shows at the CINO were completely illegal, always, Kenny designed Art Nouveau-ish posters, which the cops would look at in the window and think were abstract art, but which the cognoscenti could tilt their heads and read what was on that week. Also very important in a sort of spiritual way was, I suppose, a great faghead named Hope Stansbury. Hope was like a gay man who had been transplanted into perhaps the most beautiful face and body I've ever seen on a woman. She was a great... Her frankness and verve gave everybody permission to be free. You know, the way that so many beautiful female divas in the arts do for gay men. She was our resident diva. She also waited tables and acted and wrote. Right off, the CINO did play readings. That's the first one from December 58 when the place opened. It's from a Dorothy Parker short story called Here We Are. And they did poetry readings. This was a very popular reading of French surrealist poetry. And then a dancer who was the lover of one of Joe's friends, Charles Livier, named Billy Mitchell, convinced Joe that they should just go ahead and stage the play. So I just have readings. So this is Billy in one of the first stage plays, Edna Millay's Aria da Capo. Billy also staged 2 pirated productions of the musical The Boyfriend. What could be gayer? At the start, they did mostly existing plays. They pirated them. They never paid royalties. The most popular play around this, Tennessee Williams. Here you see his Camino Real in 1961. That's the first dated performance photo from the CINO. There were many great people there. You'll have to take my word for it. This is another photo of that picture. That's Shirley Stoner, whom you saw in The Honeymoon Killers and Seven Beauties and various movies. And here happens to be Billy Mitchell, who started it all. Another very great Tennessee Williams hit was Hello from Bertha, with one of the great CINO actresses, Mary Boyle. Married by a genetic freak, looked 40 years older than she was. So she made a living for many years playing old women. You saw her in Night of the Iguana and Reflections of the Golden Eye. She played all the rooms of once you recognized her. The play program was really stabilized when a director named Bob Dada, whose ears you see being pulled here, came in with his strolling players. They had been doing plays like, if you had a party, they would do a one-act play for you for a little money. He stayed from 1960 through 1966, and is the CINO's most frequent, one of the few straight people important at the CINO. Here are some plays he did, including a very popular No Exit that was revived endlessly. Even Joe, now everybody did everything CINO. You understand? This was not a theater. It was almost like a clubhouse where they said, hey, let's put on a show. There were very fine artists there, but there was no idea ever that it would get reviewed or anyone would get a career out of it or shows would move anywhere. You know, it was a totally new thing in the world. It's this private theater. There's Joe himself in a play. Directors began to accumulate, you know. It became very powerful and important. Here is Bob Dada. Here's Marshall Mason, who later won many Tonys for directing Lambert Wilson's plays on Broadway. Here's Andy Milligan, a sleazy underground movie maker who was also a great stage director. There's a book about Andy called The Ghastly One. He was a gentle, artistic man who made these gory, dirty exploitation movies, giving a lot of CINO people work in them, by the way. And this has a lot of more sordid details about CINO sex life in it. Manager. They did plays like, here's Keith Carsey, one of the great CINO stars, in a pirated TV play, a play pirated from TV about juvenile delinquents. They did arty plays like Ionesco. Almost all heterosexual. And you know why? There were no gay plays, that's why, children. Some of the other important gay playwrights, LA's own Bob Colby did a beautiful play about younger and older actors long before David Mamet lived a life in the theater. A beautiful girl named Laurie Lane did probably the first women's lib play, the war between men and women. Good old macho Sam Shepard did Icarus's mother. Nola Sam is a movie star now. And John Ware, who wrote 6 Degrees of Separation and 2 Gentlemen of Verona, did his 2 very first plays at the CAFFE CINO. As I say, this, you know, there were only heterosexual plays to be done, so people did only heterosexual plays. There's some foggy early gay elements. Here's a foggy photo of apparently drag queens, identifiably in the CINO, but no one knows what the show is or who the people are. Naturally, there aren't many records of this early stuff. Matt Baylor, big old handsome bruiser Matt Baylor, did a show called The Civil War in which he wore an evening gown and roller skates and tore phone books in half. Matt died last year, still promising to give me the photos of it. So there was this, you know, subterranean gay element. Hope Stansberry and her fellow waiter, Hal Gorski, did a play of which, again, we have this foggy photo where she played the man in top hat, and that's Hal in female Victorian dress, but nobody remembers what the play was. Andy Milligan, whom I mentioned before, did homoerotic versions of Genet's Death Watch and Maids. In The Maids, he had the 2 maids take a break for a lesbian love scene, and I wish I had a better copy of this photo. This is one of the handsomest men who ever lived, Dean Selmeyer, in Andy's incredibly skimpy French prison garb. The show was so steamy that the actors literally sweated even though they were half naked. Tiny Tim performed there. Here he is seeing the actress Mary Claire Charbonneau in 1964 to take the first off-Broadway play to Europe. And there were people like self-styled Southern lady Jim Perkinson, who did gayish plays like his own Recollections of Cabbage Roses, a very Tennessee Williams play, and Wilde's Salome. There was a lot of Wilde done too. Tom O'Horgan, who later directed Hair, and who in fact reformed World Theater with his tour of Paul Foster's play Tom Paine, did his very first stage work at the CINO. He did 2 abstract pieces with sound and music and movement. All I remember about them is a big, huge, fat man in a suit chasing a beautiful little blonde boy who wore nothing but some yellow gauze. And there was music and cellos and tubas. Yes, thank you. There were people who, well, it's self-explanatory. This is David Starkweather, one of the best and most important early CINO playwrights. David did plays with titles like So Who's Afraid of Edward Albee and The Love Pickle. David swears there is nothing gay in his plays, and in fact has actually requested not to be associated with the CINO. He'd hate me for this because of its association with homosexuality. However, his plays were all about these sensitive boys with no girlfriend and their terrible psychological problems. You know, Lily Tomlin said in the 50s no one was gay, just shy. There were a lot of that kind of play. I guess they're the gay sensibility play. Do you remember what Vito Russo said when someone said, is there a gay sensibility and is it important? He said, no, there's no gay sensibility, and yes, it's terribly important. Well, that was true of the CINO at this time. There's, you know, even people who would drop through and write articles about it never failed to hint that it was a gay place. They couldn't say it openly. My God, in 1961, that would be cause for a libel suit. You know, I'm sure some of you remember when you could only hint, don't go there if you don't like gay guys. Countess Ruth York, who introduced Salvador Dali to Europe, lived down the street, and she wrote a play called Lullaby for Dying Men, about a man on the way to execution, who begs his two captors for more life and offers to have sex with them as one of the many pleas. Okay. Jean-Claude Bonatali, who later wrote America Hurrah, great hit, did a play called War, about actors improvising. There's a moment in it when amongst their improvisations they find themselves attracted to each other. Jeff Weiss, often called the greatest actor off-Broadway ever produced, gave us a play called The Funny Walk Home, about a boy who comes home from the asylum crazy, largely because he's been raped in the asylum by attendants. George Birmisa gave us Daddy Violet, again a play about actors improvising, in which at one point they find themselves drawn to each other. The point is, in the early 1960s, even plays with that bit of hint of homosexuality could not have been done anywhere but the CAFFE CINO. It's hard to believe now. Gays in plays before the CINO were either screaming flippant queens whose homosexuality was never acknowledged. They were just that funny screaming neighbor next door in the Neil Simon plays. You know. Or, if their gayness was admitted, they had destroyed heterosexuals' lives. Tennessee Williams' early plays like Streetcar, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof featured the offstage dead character who ruined the love life of the heroine. So that was the role. That was gays in theater. Danny Kaye or my buddy, what's the buddy's name in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof? No.
Cliff.
The dead buddy. The one that he ate, you know. Anyway, Skipper. That was gay theater. We never dreamed there could be gay theater. So many of the CINO playwrights, although they didn't write gay then, after the Revolution did. Paul Foster, because of Tom O'Brien's tour of Paul Foster's play Tom Paine from La Mama, Paul is the most influential playwright of the last century. They saw Tom Paine with Tom O'Brien's innovative staging all over Europe, and to this day, shows come from Europe imitating it. The man who wrote Godspell, John Michael Teblack, confessed to me once. He said, I'm so embarrassed at the success of Godspell. All I did was imitate the staging of Tom Paine and put in different words. I mean, it's just you would not see the shows you see where time flows in strange ways and actors through movement convey time and place and mood if it hadn't been Paul Foster. Paul's CINO plays were a A marvelous play with the best title in off-Broadway history. In fact, the first article about off-Broadway was called, "Have you caught balls?" Balls was a puppet play. There was a little black stage on stilts and two ping pong balls swinging back and forth, operated by a man backstage. The sound was a tape of two dead men engraved side by side talking. And that represents their consciousness, these balls. And a whole crew of actors can be heard picnicking on their graves, making love on their graves, peeing on their graves. Great play. And because it was so portable, it was done all over. It may have been the first great hit off Broadway. It was done in so many places as these new places started opening, in churches and bars and art galleries and coffee houses, that a playwright named Jim Katuka said he was going to buy a bus to take people from the 7 o'clock show at the CINO to the 8 o'clock show at La Mama to the 9 o'clock show at Judson Church and the 10 o'clock show at Theater Genesis. You know, in one of his plays he said, "Coming soon to your neighborhood underground theater." Here's the cast of Balls at the recording session. Paul's other CINO play was very socially conscious about street violence in Rockland Bridge. It was years before Paul began a series of comic plays about a gay Sherlock Holmes, which he did at La Mama. So, Clarence Nelson at the CINO wrote a lovely play about a runaway girl and the very sweet and clever boy who keeps her from running away. It doesn't say he's gay, but if he's not, what is he? Clarence also wrote The Clown for the CINO, in which I and a whole cast composed only of playwrights and directors camped around in capes and tights, including Lanford Wilson. Some of you may know Lanford Wilson's plays. Okay. But is that a gay play? This is where the gay sensibility comes into place. Years later, Clarence wrote a beautiful play about gay boys called The Girl in the BBC. It was done at La Mama rather than the CINO only because she needed a door. And the CINO's plays were done right in the middle of the floor. Dan Clark wrote the kind of plays Tennessee Williams did, where the offstage dead gay guy has always caused the trouble. Here's Dan's sister Connie being strangled in the singing lesson by a guy who wants to sleep with her and she won't. So he punishes her by telling her that her old boyfriend was queer. Dan later wrote gay plays too. One of the most brilliant of our playwrights, Joseph Bush, scorned gay theater, wrote very intellectual poetic plays, including the brilliant French Grey, a monologue from Marie Antoinette on the eve of her execution, in which she has the great line when she's talking about how people cursed her for buying a big diamond necklace, taking bread out of the mouths of people. She said, "That's absurd. People don't eat diamonds. Style is a heavy responsibility, and magnificence costs money." It was pretty. But Joe disdained to write about gays until a few years later he suddenly had the enormous off-Broadway hit, Desolate Illustrated, which was omnisexual, one of the greatest shows ever. And he also wrote a notorious book called The Homosexual Handbook. Do you have that here?
Oh, yeah.
Just take a look at it. He outed everybody in it, including J. Edgar Hoover. And the whole first edition of the book disappeared. And then the book came out in a different color cover. The only change in it was that Hoover's name was out. And Joe changed his name and skipped out. Then there's what I consider a great tragedy. One of the key CINO playwrights, Tom Ian, never wrote a gay play. He did have two plays in which there were the screaming, flipping. In a play of his about Egypt, there's a chorus. "I'm named Ptolemy, I'm lobotomy, and I'm called sodomy." Always the screaming queen. But Tom never quite came out in his writing. It's a shame because he could have. He wrote a brilliant parody life of Barbra Streisand called Frustrata, or the dirty little girl with the paper rose in her hair is demented. Because we all saw Streisand before her fame wandering around the village with a paper rose in her hair, carrying shopping bags full of 30s clothes, you know. And when she became famous, Tom said, Jesus, I should have cast her, and wrote this parody of her. But his signature hit was Why Hannah's Skirt Won't Stay Down, with the great Helen Hunt as Hannah, who goes in a Coney Island funhouse and stands over a blowhole and says, it eases my tensions. She was brilliant. You've seen her in many Woody Allen movies. Is this a gay play just because she acts just like a crazed 1960s gay man on the verge of a breakdown? The play was called Why Hannah's Skirt Won't Stay Down, and I always advertise it as with Helen Hunt as Hannah and Steve Davis as Juan. The most beautiful man who ever walked the stage. That play played over and over everywhere off of Broadway as there began to be an off-Broadway. But Tom never wrote his gay play. However, years later, he became world famous and very, very rich for a play on Broadway called Dream Girls. He also wrote Very Hard and Very Hard for TV. But we are never to have Tom's gay play. Speaking of gay sensibility, George Hameson and some very talented musicians wrote perhaps the CINO's most famous play, Dames at Sea, with the 15-year-old Bernadette Peters, a star the second she stepped into Johnny Dodds' lights. It was a great hit. It ran for 12 weeks, which was unprecedented. 12 playwrights didn't get plays done because Joe just couldn't close Dames at Sea. It was absolutely brilliant. Now, how gay is Dames at Sea? Well, 3 gay men wrote it. All women in it were gay. Gay men love it. So you're left in that weird place, where is it a gay play? Now, a very sad thing about Dames at Sea, which is relevant to our story. When Dames at Sea was finally produced off-Broadway to great success and then around the world, George, and it was published, and there was no mention in the book that it had originated at the CAFFE and CINO. And I asked George, and as it happens, Steve Davis, were at George's house and the book came out. And we said, why is it CINO? He said, we can't afford to be associated with homosexuality and drugs. And his very next words were, would you and your handsome friend like to come into the steam room and try some psilocybin with me? So, how gay was Dames at Sea? It was a great caricature of it. Another tragedy, he only laterally wrote a couple of plays with gay characters in it, was the great poet of the CINO, H.M. Koutoukis, a Greek genius. The looping, lyric, half Shakespearean, half New York wisecrack lines that he wrote are indescribable. You would have to see the plays. His great hit was Medea in The Laundromat, in which Charles Stanley played Medea, tremendous power, and ended up by throwing bleach in her husband's face and throwing their baby into a washer dryer. It was splendid and obviously unique. Again, only the CINO could have given Koutoukis a stage. He also wrote a very hilarious play about the CINO called All Day for $1, or The Heaven of Broken Toys. Again, indescribable. He did do one gayish thing, though. It's Harry's fault that we had the Great Easter All-Star Spectacular. Harry was sitting ringside during a very serious Yeats play at the CINO, and he laughed where one of the actresses thought he ought not to laugh. She had a big sword as a prop. She jammed it in Harry's table and stalked out, leaving us without a show. There had never been a show at the CINO. So we suddenly called all the playwrights who knew and said, have you got a 5-minute scene? Have you got a 3-minute skit? Have you got a song? Come over. And we did the Easter All-Star Spectacular, familiarly referred to as the Spring Horror Show. It was one of those great events. See so much talent and such varied talent on the stage. I mean, the show changed in each performance. We suddenly realized, dear God, this is an artistic movement, and a great one. You know, it plays about, holy moly, we're not just a bunch of kids fooling around. This is greatness. And Harry's contribution was a skit called Kill, Kaleidoscope, Kill, a monologue for Charles Stanley as Gene Harlow. And no one who saw it will ever forget 6'6" Charles in bias cut white satin saying, when I had my period, 400 people didn't work. And perhaps loosened up by that, Harry himself played Wonder Woman. There was another time when the show didn't show up, and a man named Donald Brooks suggested we just buy some comic books and use them for scripts. You know how when you're a kid you walk around with the comic strip playing. So we read out, and the comic book of which there were the most copies available was Wonder Woman. So within an hour, we had a cast of 20 in Wonder Woman and the Secret of Taboo Mountain. And Harry himself played Wonder Woman. I played his alter ego, Shy Diane Prince. Okay. So all of this was pre or outside openly gay theater. A woman named Ellen Stewart opened a basement theater across town because some of our playwrights disliked doing only one act, which was all you could do at the CINO. So she opened a place that didn't sell coffee, but was supported by her earnings as a fashion designer at Saks. So, you know, they didn't have to change houses twice to pay the rent. So people could do full-length plays. Andy Milligan, whom I mentioned before, asked me to do a dramatization of Tennessee Williams' short story, One Arm. I refused because he wanted coarseness in it, and I was such a little prig that at that time I wouldn't write what I considered in coarse. I wish I had, because Andy's production of One Arm, which he wrote himself, not only could be considered the first out-and-out gay play ever done anywhere in 1962, but was not only was at the CINO, but was the opening play for La Mama, which is the longest-running underground theater in the world, and arguably the most influential theater of the 20th century. God bless it. So I missed the chance to write that. But that was a one-shot. You know. Gay theater, as we know it, begins with a beautiful redhead from Oregon named Dory Wilson. I was in love with Dory. Everyone at the CINO was in love with Dory. He disdained us. He was far above all that. He was the only man I knew who actually wore overcoats without his arms and sleeves. You know, wore overcoats on capes like John Barrymore in the movies. Amazing man. Dory did 4 plays at the CINO in 1961. Not only establishing himself as the first star playwright of off-Broadway, but solidifying the CINO as a venue for new plays. People came to see the new play by Dory Wilson. And that was very important because up to then it had been mostly these pirated existing plays. Dory's first play was called Babble Babble Little Tower. We have no program or pictures of that. It was about, as far as he could recreate it, it was about cops trying to close the showcase bars and coffee houses in the village. And one night, the cop in the play came in from outside, supposed to stop the show on stage, and a customer, a stripper named Stormy, took it seriously and beat him out of the cafe. But Dory's next play was called And He Made a Her. It is the only CINO play of which we have a sound recording with Joe CINO himself introducing it. You can buy it, it's worth it. And He Made a Her was the Garden of Eve took place in the Garden of Eden. And it was a decidedly feminist play. The angel in it, the guide character, who guides Patty Brown, Dork says he's the first gay character on the American stage. Well, nothing said about his being gay, and he doesn't have a boyfriend, but if Dork says so, he says so. However, Dork's next to last play at the CINO, Now She Dances, is something else altogether. It is a surrealistic version of the trial of Oscar Wilde as the play of Salome. And if the persecuted Oscar Wilde character is a gay rights protester before there were gay rights protesters. Obviously, a fantastic mind he had. Dork did one more play at the CINO and then quit writing plays for like 12 or 13 years. Just dropped out of theater and reappeared as the creator of the world's first professional gay theater, TOSOS, in New York. TOSOS stands for The Other Side of Silence. And they've been going like mad since 1974 or 5. In fact, last night they did the 45th anniversary production of my first play, The Haunted Host. They do new plays, but they also constantly keep the old CINO repertory in revival. But Dork came, changed things for everybody, and vanished. The next step in the evolution of gay theater, except for a sweet man named Alan Lysander James, who had pretty boys in suits do readings of Oscar Wilde poems, was the Mozart from Missouri, Lanford Wilson. I don't know how many of you know Lanford's plays. Once you've seen one, you can't forget them. His gift of language is totally musical. His insight into people and his ability to show the profoundest relationships between them in the most light, lyric, entertaining shows is, for my money, unparalleled in the history of theater. It's as if Noel Coward and Tennessee Williams had a child. Williams for the language, Coward for the basically lighthearted, optimistic outlook. Any of you see the 5th of July or the Mound Builders? Well, Lanford came in, and again, everything changed. The stakes went way higher. This was playwriting genius. Now, Lanford did not start out as the great master of gay theater. He started out writing plays about shy boys without girlfriends. His first play, of which not one page remains, called So Long and Fair, is about this terribly shy boy and this terribly brazen girl who comes after him in his apartment. He winds up, it has the great line, she says, I've been with a lot of men, but I'm still a virgin. None of them could break my tympanic membrane. My titanic membrane is too much. He says, it's tympanic, and that's in your ear. Well, he winds up killing her and folding her up in a sofa. Now that can be done because they did it every performance. I remember helping move the sofa in. Lanford was my roommate at the time, and watching the lighting man and the director rehearse folding each other up in the sofa. It was a great hit, both because of its craziness and Lanford's talent. I mean, it just, Lanford, back to the room. Lanford did another shy boy play, Home Free. Now the boy has gotten his sister pregnant, but it's clear they're no longer sleeping together. And he's totally neurotic. And she's told him he never has to leave this tiny little hotel room they live in. Then she goes into labor and has a heart attack. And he won't go to get the doctors. He stands there watching her die while he talks to their imaginary friends, telling them, okay, is this gay sensibility? No. But then Lanford made up for all of it with the crucial play in the history of gay theater, The Madness of Lady Bride, a near soliloquy for an aging queen going bats with her telephone all alone one hot summer weekend in New York. Not only was it a gay play which was simply so well written that even the straight critics could not dismiss it. He just bowled them over. Some of them didn't even mention the character was gay. They were so entranced. And also entranced by the great performance of Neil Flanagan as Lady Bride. It was revived over and over. I have posters from several productions. It was running when Joe died. It was the longest running play in CINO history. And I highly recommend that you find someplace and read it. Or better yet, get a friend to read it aloud to you, because until you hear the music of those wise-cracking lines, he looks at himself in the mirror and says, "Face it, dear, you are just one of those bits of the 20th century that didn't come off, like cream of celery soup or striped toothpaste." Langford's only other gay play at the CINO was called Sex is Between Two People, a very sweet and very sad dialogue between two guys who meet in a room at the baths. It may also have been the first dramatic depiction of a gay bathhouse. He kind of let us down, in my opinion, when his beautiful play, This Is the Real Speaking, which is a sort of concerto of voices from a small town. It contains a scene where all the men in it play boys jerking off together. Over in a corner, hunched over and saying, "Puts a spit on it, makes it slicker." And just one sweet little scene in it. When it was done for TV, Langford changed it to the boys sneaking a cigarette. And I, for one, why didn't you just refuse to do it when I said, "Let you do that perfectly normal scene?" And he said, "For the money, honey." He also, I don't regret his doing this. He did something that a lot of gay playwrights had done in the past. He took a relationship between two gay male roommates from the CINO and changed them to women. And the only reason I forgive him is it, again, is so brilliantly written. It's called Ludlow Fair. And again, I recommend you read it. Don't take my word for it. Read it. Lady Bride was running when Joe CINO died. And Neil Flanagan, who played Lady Bride, was the only respectable person at the CINO. So he put on a suit and tie. He was the only person to go to Joe CINO's funeral in Buffalo. Well, the one night he was away, Charles Stanton, who had played Harlow, took over the role of Lady Bride and was so brilliant that, much to Neil's consternation, Langford took Charles with him when Lady Bride toured Europe. So here's Charles Stanton as Lady Bride in Scotland, I think. He was brilliant. The next gay play came from the funny Art Ferry from Roswell. The day that I helped move the sofa in from Langford's place along with there, Langford and I then went out to get breakfast while they practiced with the sofa. I stopped in the door and looked around and saw them folding the sofa out, talking and folding it back. And suddenly, I always read poetry. Suddenly, I had an idea for a play because I knew who those guys were unfolding the bed. I knew what they were saying, and I knew why they folded it back up instead of getting into it. So I wrote, The Haunted Host, which had its 45th anniversary production last night in New York. The Host is based on Joe CINO, although this is not Italian on his own superficial resemblance. And the straight boy who tries to take advantage of his charm, the gay man, to get help as a writer, to get career help, was based on all of us. We weren't straight, but I felt we were eating Joe alive. That he never asked anything. He gave us his floor. If we needed $5 to buy some glitter, he'd always pull out his box of dirty change under the cotton machine. He worked day and night. He had no real help. And I thought we were eating him alive. And out of that somehow came this, I can't describe it. Other people say it's the first gay play. Because it's the first play in which the character's gayness is not seen as a flaw in any way. In fact, the other character, strength, is more of a flaw. And I threw into it my love of Broadway wisecracking plays by people like Gene Kerr and John Bender. So every line is a joke. I wouldn't write it that way today, maybe I'm wrong, but every line is pugged on by the other character. People still seem to enjoy it. I played it. I used to tell people I played it because I couldn't get anyone else to play gay. That was a lie. Neil Flanagan was dying to play it. But I was so arrogant that I didn't want the person who played Lady Bride to play Jay. And as punishment, I wound up having to play it myself. And so this is Molly at 24. Kind of old for a playwright to start. In the CINO. Naturally, I have more pictures of this than of any other play. This is me at what I fancied was my dramatic peak. What time is it? Do I have to hurry? Okay. There's a funny story about the original poster for the Haunted House. Lanford was also a graphics designer. And he was, I noticed he was going to do the whole poster for Host, right? And he loved the play, so he did a lot of them. I said, oh, that's so sensitive. I want something bold and eye-catching. And after about an hour of this, he said, what the fuck do you want about this? Took a piece of paper and slashed a big X on it. I said, yes. He said, but he's such a perfectionist that he did 100 slashed X's before he found one that pleased him. And we just printed the information in Mars the X. Marshall Mason, the director, went to get the posters made, and he said, are you going to use your own? My real name is Bob O'Connor. He said, do you want to use Bob O'Connor for both acting and writing? I said, no, that makes you sound vague. And everybody knew me as Bob O'Connor, so I used Bob O'Connor as an actor and just grabbed my first two names, Robert Patrick, the playwright. I never knew I was going to write another play. I did not know this was going to become, the play with which more gay theaters open than any other, or that it would behoove me to keep the name. Had I known I was choosing a name for life, I would have picked something dramatic. My pet would be Dominic Tamerlane. But that was not to be. Here it is. This is the standard photo that's used usually to illustrate Host. And lately, productions the last 10 years, they always take a photo pose just like this for me. I have this pose for a dozen productions. So after me, you wouldn't think things could get any better, but an existential philosopher named Bob Heidi, who had hung around with the Warhol people, was in a couple of Warhol movies. Well, Bob also collects Disney memorabilia and has an apartment that looks like a ride through It's a Small World. I mean, he has two incredibly different sides of his personality. He wrote a play called The Bed. Andy Warhol filmed it, by the way, but although recently I heard they had shown the film at Yale, it's impossible to find out from the estate how to get it, or, otherwise I would try to have copies of it. But it was the CINO cast. It's one of the two CINO plays that were filmed. You can see it's a very existential play. You can see it? I made a poster from that photo, which I like quite a lot. The lovers, a blonde in black and a brunette in white. No, it's the blonde in white and brunette in black, right? Are terribly world-weary. And if you knew Bob and his lover, John Gilman, you'd know where they come from. They lie in bed. One of them is rich, so they don't have to work. And boy, are they world-weary. There's a famous exchange in it, which was for a while chalked all over Greenwich Village walls. People just loved it. They sigh, God is dead. No, Nietzsche is dead. No, sex is dead. No, we're dead. And as lugubrious as it sounds, Bob had the power of rhythm and meter and speech that although the audience laughed when they heard it, they got the point. And it spoke very much to our generation. We kind of felt like that, like, okay, we have this freedom, what is it? There's a great hit. another lovely photo of it here. Bob also wrote, for Valentine's Day, one of Joe Cino's favorite plays, Moon. It takes place, like so many Cino plays, in a small New York apartment. The characters are a husband and wife, very young, very beautiful, who are having terrible problems, but they can't define them. You know, they're unhappy, the world is unhappy, civilization is crumbling, you know, their sex life is probably off, but they just talk this dark, flashy, clever talk back and forth. And because in the beginning you were, this was long before the moon landing, of course, but in the play, a rocket has been sent to the moon but hasn't yet landed it. And they talk about that a lot as a metaphor, like, yes, it gets the moon, so what? What has our civilization come to? What's it all for? Then another couple come in, a strange, surly couple who claim that the other couple met them at a drunken brawl the night before and invited them over. And the four of them said, all hating being there, and try to relate, and all they reveal is every ugly thing about themselves and their own relations. And then the husband just gets terrified and flees, but not before Bob Heidi had a lull in this horrible conversation. The husband put on a record and danced to it. This beautiful, beautiful actor, Victor Lepard, this Beatles hair, stood still and danced to a song whose lyrics go, do you love me like I hoped you would? Do you love me like you really should? And Landon Wilson said it was the strongest moment in modern theater. Because he said, in that song, everything that other characters couldn't say was being said, do you love me? Do you love me? And that man runs out of the house, and the wife gets rid of the crazy poor couple. Then the husband comes back, and in the hallway before he goes to his house, he meets a new upstairs gay neighbor who has brought him freshly baked bread and says, we heard that sounds below, and then it got quiet, and I thought it was safe to bake bread. So I brought you some. And he describes making the bread, and he's strangely peaceful and centered. And the husband says, what do you do? He says, I paint. And the husband says, what do you paint? He says, circles. Some people say they are planets. Some say they are balls. Some say they are just circles. It calms me. And he invites them up anytime they want to meet his lover, his male lover. And this somehow brings the husband down, and he comes in, and he and his wife make up and kiss and presumably make love, as over the radio they hear the announcement that man has reached the moon. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm almost in tears just describing it. It is a great play, and as far as I know, no one has ever done it right since. Every production I've seen of it, except John's, makes the gay man from upstairs a silly, screaming thing. They just don't get the message that it's nothing to do with being gay or straight. This is a guy who has it together, and just the presence of a guy who has it together helps these other people. That's what it means when a culture loses its meaning. You've only got each other. I want to point out that all of these gay plays, none of them is about being gay. Lady Bride is about idealism, about going crazy because you don't know down. Haunted Host is about codependence. Moon is about people's need for relationships. We didn't know we were creating gay theater. It's just Joe Cino gave us such freedom, more freedom than playwrights had ever had before. And so we wrote what was on our mind, and a lot of that was stories about gay people. The world's first stage stories about gay people. Then beautiful William Hall, who was Langford Wilson's lover, wrote a short story. And Langford said, it was all dialogue. And I said, it's not a short story, it's a play. But he said, I can't write plays. You write plays. I'm just a prose writer. And I said, oh, Billy, shut up. So they then split up. And Billy, in vengeance, turned the story into a play and became a major Cino playwright. That one was Good Night, I Love You. A gay boy and his fag hag, a fag and his hag, as Bill calls them, are having their usual late-night phone conversation. He's thinking only of his lover. She's desperately trying to hold his attention. So to hold his attention, she tells him, she makes up a bedtime story about him and his lover, in which he gets pregnant by his lover and has the baby. And this holds his attention like mad, and that's all she can hope for. She loves him. It's all she can hope for. So she's happy, and at the end he says, "Good night, I love you." Billy's favorite line out of it, and I guess everybody's favorite line, was she says, "So you have a cesarean section?" And he says, "No, no, 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 no. I want to have my baby through my ass." That show didn't get repeated. Billy also wrote, and I guess this is gay sensibility work again, "Thank you, Miss Victoria." He would say, "Yuppie." We didn't have the word then yet, but we had the people. Played by Neil Flanagan. His father's forcing him to work in the office. You know, he's rich. And so he sits there bitching over the phone. And then just for fun calls a dominatrix. And by the end of the play, she's got him on the floor naked, tied to his desk with his own tie, begging her to call him back. And the lights go down. Eerie play. Billy edited the New American Play series, introducing many of us to the world. Wrote As Is for Broadway, one of the first two AIDS plays on Broadway. And more recently, wrote the book for the Metropolitan's first commissioned opera for its Lincoln Center Opera House, The Ghosts of Versailles, which is done all around the world. Billy did okay. Peter Hartman and Charles Stanley together wrote and played Vistas of the Heart Unveiled, in which Charles was described in the press as Mona Lisa with a mustache. It's a weird play, a monologue from Charles in which handsome Peter fawns around him, obviously loving it. Charles just talks and poses. Not at the CINO, but at another place where they did it where it was feasible. They hung 100 candles by the century in the ceilings of the umbrella and lit both ends. Such a metaphor for love. I mentioned the comic book show Wonder Woman earlier. Charles Stanley carried that forward into an art form. And one night when the show didn't show up, grabbed a comic book and made Maggie Dominic into Snow White for Walt Disney Comic. It was a lovely experiment. That's me I'm just out of the picture, as the tallest doc in the history of the world. For the first performance, I had to play all 7 chords with 3 hats on each arm. But then we recruited people. A lot of CINO people came in and took turns being chorus different nights. And if we didn't have 7, we'd make some audience members come up and follow. It was a lovely concept and a lovely show. And I think very gay in its essence. Then, inspired by the comic book shows, we also did Faust and Archie Comic. A Warhol person, as we call them, named Soren Ingenue, wrote A Christmas Carol, in which he played Mrs. Cratchit in drag. This is me. Now, I have to explain to you that there were always drugs at the CINO. It was the 60s, for heaven's sake. But there was nothing like the Warhol people came in. I mean, it really was amazing. It was like the door had opened and, some crazy other dimension came in. They were drugged all the time. The dressing room was always full of pots, cooking drugs, and hypodermics. And these little balls of cotton before they had done. I mean, it got really crazy. And part of the craziness, we all said, oh, well, I'll join in, So this is a photograph from Christmas Carol. I'm playing the Ghost of Christmas Present or something. When I saw this photo, it took me an hour to realize that's me. I remember being in the play, but I didn't remember this scene or this costume. I mean, that's how it was like. For 3-4 weeks, I and all of us lived in this cobweb world. We're all out of our mind with speed, acid, pot, pills. Swan was a brilliant writer, but you might say he grew up at the factory. And that's what life was like at the factory. And it was very destructive to the CINO. I mean, more power than, but it caused them that. I probably need to. I should have my own easel. A deep one. There you are. Is this making any sense so far? I can organize it this time. Here's some more photos from that play. Michael Smith directed it, the Village critic, and himself a playwright. Michael, it has running at this moment in Portland, Oregon, a play about the CINO. He's going to send me photos of it to post on my website. I had not mentioned perhaps the third greatest performance of the CINO after Helen Hampton's Hannah and Neil Flanagan's Lady Bride. An LA actress named Jackie Lynn Copeland, who played Christmas Past with a burning birthday cake on her head. She came in and had a long scene with a birthday cake with the candles lit on her head, never flinched, never hurried, never, showed any kind of, and not only is she brilliant, but Jesus, imagine, she was great. Soren wrote another play more overtly gay. At least one could understand that it was gay. It was incomprehensible. It was called Donovan's Johnson. And this is the notorious Undine from The Factory. And the guy named Olivia Vasconcelos. They seem to be playing gay prisoners just out of jail. But that's all I can remember of it. It was sad to see such stuff on the CINO stage, but it was clever, but there was this sort of whirlpool happening. It ran for only a few nights, and then Charles Stanley, you saw him, the 6'6", very refined guy, played Harlow, who was stage managing. For some reason, came on stage one night, broke all the props, stormed out, and the show closed. That's what it was getting to be like. Hal Borsky, the mad poet, wrote, I guess, the last gay play to be done at the CINO. We have no photos, but it was called The Brown Crown. Now listen carefully. Hal played Zephyrus, the West Wind, exiled to an island by Apollo for stealing Hyacinthus from him. Therefore, the world has no West Wind and has not had one since mythological times. Okay? Then a scientist, played by Irving Metzman, whom you've seen in many Woody Allen movies, finds the island, and on being told that this is the West Wind, says, don't be absurd, there's no such thing as a West Wind. Well, he winds up being introduced to love by Zephyrus, and Zephyrus returns to the world with him, and the world has a West Wind. Okay, which follows. I always say, well, the plot of the Brothers Karamazov would sound pretty silly if I told that to you, too. It was magic. Hal had been in plays by everybody I've told you about so far, and had obviously picked up the trade. Very, very clever, very witty. And at the end, Walter Harris, who, didn't you ever see Hair on Broadway for the first time? Or have the album? Well, it's Walter who sings What a Piece of Work Is Man. Sweet little Walter. Walter Harris. Anne and George Harris had 5 kids, and anytime we needed a child for a play off Broadway, we'd call the Harrises. Walter played the Sandman, who comes in and puts the characters to sleep at one point and has a beautiful speech. I don't know. Anyway, that's how things were going. It was getting pretty crazy. Okay. Now, in the meantime, the CINO got more and more attention. In 1964, Joe Chino and Ellen Stewart of La Mama got the first Obies given to Off-Broadway, which was a kind of major event. Neil Flanagan got one for playing The Madness of Lady Bride, first Off-Broadway actor to get one. Here they are, outside the Obies. Neil with his wife, and Joe with Johnny Torrey, who's just hidden behind him. I tried to locate the photographer to see if he got a shot that has Johnny in it. There was at the same time we were all wearing ourselves down in grinding poverty and drug abuse, creating modern theater, We were also getting kind of famous. These photos are from the New York Times in 1966. That's Joe and Sam Shepard and me. Rather arbitrarily picked. You know, Sam and I were by no means the major playwrights of off at the time. That would have been Landon Wilson and Paul Foster. But we always thought they picked us because we looked most dissolute and drugged out. And the article was a bit of a sneer at these silly people putting shows on in basements downtown. So I think they picked us because we looked degraded. But you had to love Joe. And as we near the end of the story, I'd like to say, it really was for a love of Joe and Joe's love of us that all this happened. He could have done anything in the coffee house. He could have told us, no, I don't want to do folk music. But he was famous for kicking Bobby Dylan out. He said, of course, he only went a couple of blocks over to the bitter end. But he said, oh, that's phony. You're singing those 30 songs. You should write your own songs about modern problems. Well, Dylan took his advice, but took it elsewhere. But basically, Joe could have let him. Could have made a lot of money. You could have had the stand-up comics, the jazz bands, everything, the rock singers. Out of love for us, he let us do this totally new thing. And he gave himself. If we gave ourselves 100% to it, Joe gave himself 150%. And I'm afraid it told on him much worse than it did on us. Joe's lover, Johnny, the beautiful giant genius, had to be sent away to detox. Johnny was an electrician. He had a silly electrical accident and was electrocuted. Joe went straight down. It got worse and worse. He'd disappear with Undine and the other world. People would come back boneless. You know, we all ran the place and kept the shows going, but it was clear Joe was going to leave. Joe did one final performance. He hadn't performed for 20 years, I don't know. He participated in a dance concert with some other CINO people. He danced to the bolero in just blue jeans and socks. He had them set up doors, in door frames, all around the huge stage of Judson Church. And he slammed the doors in time to the bolero. And those who were there said it was an unrepeatable, magnificent thing, but terribly frightening. One person described it, she said, it was as if he was telling us he had gone through a door and couldn't find his way back. A few days later, the last time I saw Joe, he was standing on 6th Avenue, waiting for a taxi to go uptown and see one of his many speed doctors. That night, he came back down, went to a bar, there were some people. 2 people, each not knowing the other, had done it, slipped acid into his drink. He showed up at Neil Flanagan's house in Brooklyn, late in the night, hallucinating out of his mind. Neil and his wife Jacqueline tried to get Joe to stay there. He said, no, I'm going home. I'm okay. He went to the CINO, put on the Costa Diva, there, took a knife and stabbed himself. He called Johnny Dodd, who lived down the street, and Johnny's lover, Michael Smith, answered and came and got him. They took him to the hospital. He lived for 3 days, and the line of blood donors for him was the longest blood donor line they had had since World War II. The whole world showed up. I managed the CINO for those 3 days, and it was not fun. Then, one afternoon, I was there to open it, and the help, all these people you've seen, were just standing looking at me like they really wished I'd stopped so they could just close the place. I said, no, I want to call me a Ruby Keeler. So, to perk them up, I called the hospital. And they told me Joe was much improved. And I told the staff, and they brightened up. So I ran out, I guess, to go to the store to get pastry or something. And I ran into Maggie Dominique, who had played Snow White. I said, I just called the hospital, Joe's better. She said, I just came from there, Bobby's dead. Well, there were only 4 times in the history of the CINO where the show was canceled. One was Joe walked out, one was winning. Charles Stanley broke the props and wouldn't run the show. One was, during Haunted Host, there was a fire next door and we were choked out by smoke. And the other was that night. Neil Flanagan had to go on stage and play an aging, insane me after what had happened. But the place filled up so full that people were literally overflowing on the stage. And we just stopped halfway through the first performance. The CINO went on for almost a year under the management of first Charles Stanley and then Michael Smith. And they did greatly, and by the way, did some of the greatest shows ever done at the place. But it had all been for Joe. And with him gone, because of his spirit and what he gave us, there were now many other theaters very equipped, and with people to help you, and with grants, and things like that. And it all just kind of trickled to a close because one reason, apparently Joe's family had given him some protection from the law. I told you the place was completely illegal. Well, after Joe's death, cops dropped by with summonses 3 and 4 times a day. We couldn't pay them. Nobody was paying for working with Gina. So we put them on a spindle, you know, like waiters' checks, and put it on the toilet. We didn't know what else to do with it. And Michael Smith went to court and had to engage in a fantastic rigmarole trying to keep the place open or get a license for it so it was legal. But it all just trickled down. And it was okay. Without Joe, we were all just hanging around till Joe's spirit left, really. But like the reason I was singing that Coco Chanel song earlier, you know, it wasn't always hell, sometimes it was swell. It was. In spite of the sad parts of the ending, all over the world, entertainment is freer of content and form than would ever have been possible in 1958 when the CINO opened. It was a magic thing. It was like a stone thrown into a sluggish pond that sent ripples that have never stopped. And at the center of it all is the most wonderful person I ever met, and the most important person in my life, and in my way of thinking, one of the most important people in Western art, Joe Gino. Just shortly after Joe died, there were the Oldies for that year. And I want to close with this picture of all of us temple slaves from the Gino, marching into the Oldies like good rockettes. Joe always called us his rockettes. No matter what happened, we went out there and gave him a show. And that day, we all felt like Joe's rockettes. I thank you. You've been a wonderful audience. If you have any questions, I will entertain them now.